Go. Hello and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. It's Friday. We have another KSA for you, and we are joined today by Eric.
What up, nerds?
That's
it's
right.
Your boy.
Word. We have many questions today, so we're going to jump right in because I think they will fill the time amply.
Yes.
Starting off with Emily, who asks, Eric, do you think it's possible for Ari to have a happy ending? What do you think a happy ending would be for him? Presumably riffing off of your question to Colin the other night.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that question. I do think it's possible for Ari to have a happy ending. In terms of what that looks like, I mean, Ari grew up in a very family-centric environment, like with the way that I've envisioned the Corvair or Corvar. The Corvar on Corvair. But so, family was always a big thing, and having kind of that tribe of people around you. And so I think some version of that, I think Ari's post-adventuring life ideally would involve, settling down, starting a family, like whether that's in Stormreach or somewhere else. He likes Stormreach, so ideally he's still there. In terms of the possibility of that happening, Cool Seer is risen and going to lay Stormreach to waste. So, getting less likely as each day goes by. And Ari also has this bad habit of making deals with people. So, no, I think that the deal with the Forgotten Prince, Ari does feel like is under control because there's an end point. Like, he knows when the bill is paid. This new deal, both Eric and Ari are very nervous about that situation. So I know what Ari's happy ending looks like in my head. Like, if we do an epilogue for this campaign and I get to smile at the end of it, whether or not Ari will allow himself to realize that happy ending is a whole other question. So, yeah.
Cool. And then we have questions from, I think this is the first time that Savage Artificer has given us questions, but they ask, first to me, Philip, I love the Professor X, Thora, versus Magneto, Dane, narrative that you've woven into this campaign. Bravo for the longevity. That's not a question, but thank you. I also like that. I'm glad. I hope it's not too directly that, because I've tried not to make either of them. I mean, obviously they fulfill those archetypes in our little X-Men universe, and that's on purpose. But I've tried to make them not perfect copies of it. I don't think Thora is quite as altruistic as Xavier in the 90s cartoon, at least, is. I realize there are arcs in the comics where Xavier is a little Machiavellian, and the current iteration of the X-Men world I haven't read a lot of, but I know that there's like a giant council of mutants that runs the island, and includes Apocalypse.
Beast has a secret lab in a giant skeleton with clones of himself, and he has an army of Wolverine clones that do his bidding. That is where the state of X-Men are currently.
So I'm not up to date on that. I'm talking like classic 90s X-Men.
Yeah.
And I feel like that Xavier is pretty altruistic. And I don't think Thora is quite as altruistic as that. Thora is a little more pragmatic, although she is. And she's also trying to make up for something, which is not mainly a theme in Xavier's story so much. But Dane obviously being the more aggressive one. So I'm glad that dynamic is entertaining. I'm enjoying both of those characters. I got to say, this is one of those situations where, as a GM, I've put myself in a position that I'm not usually in. I really wish someone else played Dane. Like, it would be really a lot of fun to riff with a Dane character. Like, if me and someone else were playing, if me and you were playing in a campaign as Thora and Dane,
Yeah.
it would be fun to create that dynamic, having to create it because it's obviously a pairing of characters that should have a lot of dialogue to each other, but it's neither fun nor entertaining to watch the GM have conversations back and forth with
Yeah.
themselves. So that creates a difficult. And I know, you're a longtime GM and have plenty of experience finding yourself in that situation. But I do like both those characters, so I'm glad that that is coming across, and you may see why I have separated them as thoroughly as
Yeah.
I can, um, and try to
Well, and it's
have
also
only one at a time.
Well, and it's also tough because you think about like the time that they were children of Khyber together,
Hmm.
and why the falling out happened, why Thor left Sharn, all of these, like, because I ran that in campaign 1 of Eberron Renewed, where like I could convey so much information to the players if these two NPCs could just have a conversation, but I don't want
Right.
to do that. And so yeah, there is so much that we can learn from a Thor and Dane conversation, even a fight where they're like sniping at each other. But yeah, it's not the most engaging way to play D&D, watching
Yeah.
watching your DM do a dramatic
Yeah.
duet
Watching a
intro.
one man show. It's almost like it would be easier if I wrote out their dialogue in narrative, like with
Yeah.
Thora says and Dane's. Like it would almost be better, like because then it would just be like listening to someone read a book.
Yeah, and I
I
mean
don't know.
that was a tool that you and I used, you
Hmm.
much more so to greater effect when we had our home game way back when, is using a forum where you could communicate with an NPC. But obviously now that we've decided to take our games and put them on the internet, you got to keep everything in the
Right.
content.
Yeah, that would be. I I think it would be cool if you could create some way where you've got like a multimedia content
Yeah,
streams, but it would be so. I don't know. You'd have to like create it somewhere where people aren't missing out if they're. I don't know. It's
yeah,
you know, and you got to have players that buy into. Let's also do some forum role play and that kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah. So,
Um. So Savage Artificer asks for the players. That's you. When coming up with your characters, did you initially model them off an existing mutant, or are they completely your own creation? And I know you've stated your favorites already, but I don't remember if this question was asked. I don't
yeah,
think this specific question was asked.
yeah. I definitely I think it's pretty fair to say that uh, yeah, when creating Ari, I felt like I was creating an amalgamation of two mutants. I was going in the power set very Jean Grey esque,
Right.
and I had the idea of like the aberrant version of a Sybaris Mark being a compelling progression, a la Dark Phoenix. Obviously, we
Sure.
haven't like done anything in that direction, which it may not happen, but that was just in the early stages thought process of this idea of uh, aberrant marked individual whose power begins to get away from them, and how does that affect their outlook on the world and their personality. Similar vein, personality wise, I was going for much to I've always been the counter voice in a lot of friend groups when we're talking about our favorite insert team dynamic here. When it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I was a Leonardo fan. Power Rangers, I was a Jason fan. X-Men, I was a Cyclops fan. Like the Cyclops Wolverine dichotomy, I was like, Wolverine's a jerk. What are you all talking about? Like, rolls up to this mansion and acts like he owns the place. So
His leather jacket and his cigarettes.
um no, there's a comic book, I forget what issue it is, I forget even what storyline it was, but it was when they were redoing the first arcs of the X-Men. I don't think it was the first class comic, but it was like in that
Hmm.
vein of the young team. And it was after they got back from a field mission, and Hank and Bobby and Gene and everyone was just down, like, listening to music, having a party with some of the other students that weren't on the team. And Gene looked around and realized that Scott wasn't there, and she went upstairs and found Scott like writing out the report and kind of,
Right.
here's what happened, here's what we need to learn. And Scott did that so that everyone else could be down having the party, because he felt like that was necessary to keep everyone alive. And so from a personality standpoint, I definitely like the idea of playing a more Cyclops character. And early stages with the Thora, once Thora entered the picture, I tried to lean into that a bit more than Ari does now, with like being the one on the communicator, kind of saying, "Here's what's happening in the field right now. Here's what's going on." Um, Being the one keeping Thora in the loop and really trying to engage with her on that level.
Yeah,
So yeah, but
cool.
Ari's
What
also
part
not
of
stick in the mud the way leaders often
true,
are. So it's kind of a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other,
except about murder?
right? God, the amount of blowback I've gotten for my character being anti-murder from both the other players and the audience has been wild.
I mean, there's a degree to which I did this on purpose. Like I presented a deeply unlikable person whose death would be extraordinarily convenient,
Hmm.
gave you all a perfect excuse to kill them because
Yeah.
Kyrus all but told you to.
Yep.
Uh, and then, as I expected, allowed that to be a a
The
point of
conflict.
the conflict of the mission. I did expect you to be less alone. In let's not. I'm not at all surprised that Shade was a yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah.
I'm a little more surprised. I'm not surprised that Pog is good for a fight, but I'm a little more surprised that Pog is good for cold-blooded murder.
That's Ari saying it's not a fight. Like the dude
Right.
was tied
Yeah.
up in his house. Like, what are we talking
Sure. Yeah,
about?
and again, on purpose. Like if you guys obviously
Yeah.
if you guys had busted in and he fought you, then there would be no conflict to it at
Yeah.
all. Of course. Well, great, we
Totally.
killed him
Yeah.
because he attacked us. But
That's awfully convenient. Thank you, Philip.
um
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Savage Artificer also asks, what part of Stormreach do you feel most attached to? And it is addressed to the players. So I'm curious. I mean, I think Ari's answer is probably fairly obvious, but I am curious, having played in Stormreach both here and a little bit in Ever Renewed and in our home game, what's your favorite part of Stormreach?
Yeah. Yeah. The school is obviously Ari's, like the thing that he's most attached to, the thing that he would die to protect and save. Um, my as a player, Eric's favorite part of Stormreach, I think, is the market, just
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much you can do there with the concept of this, not only a pirate town, but also I think it's too extreme to call it like a refugee town, but like a
Right.
place where people have flocked to in the wake of the last war.
Yeah.
Not even just the mourning, but just the Treaty of Thronehold, and it's truly a cosmopolitan city where you could literally put anything you want to as a player or a DM into that market, and it's going to make sense. Like if you just need something to happen. So I
Mm-hmm.
really like the market of Stormreach. So yeah.
Yeah. Savage Artificer then compliments me again, so I'm going to read it. Philip, you're very good about keeping track of things in a scene. Oh, as a GM, I'm horrible about remembering all the NPCs and environmental effects in a scene. What's your secret? I don't usually feel like I
They're
am doing a
they're
super good
they're
job of
right, Philip.
this.
As a GM, you're very good at this. Uh, we have a recent arc on Eberron Renewed where Philip was not the best person at
That's true. Yeah.
that.
I I don't know how to answer this question. I'm not usually feeling great about it, and there's definitely
Yeah.
like a whole GMing, there's definitely like a whole over on the Geek Pantheon channel riffing on how to do this as a GM. Um, Things that I have done to try and track them is I like physical stuff, like physical notes or props or things like that to help me keep track of things in a scene. And I'll usually have a lot of little cards, whether they're the monster cards or just little sticky notes, that kind of thing. Um, I keep an actual GM notebook, and I have bought many actually like formatted for GMs because I have a problem about buying notebooks. Um, and one thing that I like in a GMing notebook is on a like a session planning page is having a little box for important NPCs.
Yeah.
where I can put an important NPC and a couple of notes about them uh, just on the page, so it's just always there in my view. That's the closest thing I can offer to a secret. Eric, you run an extremely NPC heavy campaign over in Eberron Renewed. Do you have tricks that help you keep track of this?
Um, yeah, I mean, I generally speaking now, I've gotten my NPC note taking down to a science in my brain. Like I figured out the formulas that work where, I obviously have my proper like campaign notebook that has like, here's all the ambitions this NPC has, here's who they are as a person, yada, yada, yada. But when I'm planning out a session and I know that an NPC is going to be there, um, I'll have obviously their name, brief, like 3 words about their appearance if there's somebody that hasn't been around a long time, and then like 2 words on their voice, and then the last interaction the players had with them. Like that's the
Voice
four
note is
lines I
good.
have. Yeah. And so those are the 4 things, because the last thing the PCs did with them provides the context of like, oh,
Yeah.
they're mad at you all because last time you were
Right.
around, or they're very thankful or whatever. And so that's good for just being able to slot them in to a scene pretty quickly and easily. um so yeah, that's what I do.
That's really good. I like the having notes on the voice, and I especially like, and I hadn't thought of that, having a note on whatever the last interaction was, because there are a lot of times where it's hard to keep the energy um, consistent
Hmm.
between interactions. Sometimes that's
Yeah.
just a function of session breaks. Like I noticed distinctly, Jonas's energy shifts between the episode before this one and this episode because we stopped recording and then we recorded again. And so starting
Yeah.
again after you guys just bust, like building up and you guys bust in and slaughter everything and now zombies and ghosts everywhere, it's very easy to get that energy. And then we start again and it's like, where was I? How
Yeah.
high up was I in
Yeah.
the freak out
Yeah.
mode? Um, one thing I really like when I can get them are actual little NPC cards.
Hmm.
Lots of publishers have put out little like face cards you can use for NPCs. I actually got the starter set for the Dune RPG from Modifius, and the adventure came with a deck of cards for every NPC that you encounter,
Mm.
with a really like brief version of their stat block, a portrait, and a few notes on uh, who they are and what their motive is and what their traits are. And now I'm just killing time while Eric digs for whatever he's
Sorry.
about to pull out and show us all.
You go to
Um,
Staples and get Avery business card printable sheets, and then you can do this where you have
you
your
can make
NPC
your
art
own.
with their name, and then you can put notes on the back about who they are, so that when you show them, and these are thick enough to where if you use the I have the Pathfinder like bestiary pawn pack, the little stands
Hmm.
that they clip into,
Oh,
they'll clip into
nice.
those stands, so you can just
Just
stick
set
them
him
out
out there.
on a, yeah. And so like, here's Levi. He's a Tabaxi librarian, and my players love him and adore him so much. So
Oh,
yeah.
of course they do. He's a cat person.
Yeah. An old
I have
old grizzled
found
cat person.
I have found it to be true that if you introduce an anthropomorphic animal person, it is inevitable that players love them. I need to run a campaign where I introduce a lot of those as villains,
Just
just
to
to mess with the player.
balance the scales. I need to
Yeah.
show you real quick, talking about animal people. I introduced the wizard in the town, who I created for the sole purpose of being able to cast Identify on the magic options or magic objects they find. And then Jeff's character immediately got the pearl and was able to cast Identify. He's like, well, this person's function is completely obsolete, so I got to find something else to do with them. Um,
Oh, that's funny.
but sorry, he's
You know,
very cute.
a cool thing you could do with those is you could use them as like initiative trackers along the top of your
Yeah,
screen, because then you'd
absolutely.
have the players can see the initiative order, but also you can still see the notes on the back
Hmm.
as you're going.
Oh, here he is. He's right there. His name's Cherith May, and he's a turtle wizard who
Cherith,
lives in a tower.
adorable.
Yeah. So,
Yep, I like his hat.
yeah. So anyway,
So
these
yeah.
are
So
very
anyway, those
helpful.
are some things that we have done to try. I'm glad it seems like I do a really good job at it, and I'm glad it comes off that I'm always on top of it. I often don't feel like it. I very rarely, once a scene gets going, I very rarely feel like I have any kind of hold on the reins in this
mentioning
campaign. So,
mentioning environmental effects, if it's in an
mhm,
encounter, what I do that helps me remember that environmental effects are happening, have them evolve as each round goes
yeah,
by and have a note on what happens. So then you'll
mhm,
remember, oh, the room's on fire. Right. So the fire gets worse. So this is happening
yeah.
mechanically to you all. So once
I
I
really
started doing
love
that, I remembered it a lot better.
Yeah, I really love something from this. I'm sure this is in other RPGs, but something from the Fate core system is the use of index cards for aspects of a scene.
Yep.
And so we're playing a scene, one of you does something and knocks over the lamps, the chandelier, and now the room's on fire. So just, index card, the room's on fire and stick it out there. And then anytime something happens that you want to give an effect like advantage or disadvantage, you could just, well, the room's on fire. So that action has disadvantage or that action
Yeah.
has advantage, that sort of thing.
Dry
So
erase
that's,
playing cards on Amazon. Very
those
good
are
for
great.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
I just have my DM's bag
So
right here next to my chair.
yeah.
I'm like, and here's the thing I use.
So I tend to like little manipulable things. If you're running entirely online, those are trickier.
Hmm.
Although a lot of virtual tabletops will let you throw little notes out all over your screen. So my desk is usually littered with little notes to myself about what's happening in the session,
Yeah.
even when I'm running online. But yeah, that's some thoughts on how
Hmm.
Eric and I do it in our games. Darren asks a fascinating question. Eric, do you think you would get along with Ari?
Yeah, I think I would. I think a lot of aspects of what I find appealing about Friends and whatever, like I Ari ticks those boxes because I mean, if I'm truly honest with myself, one of the reasons that I respect Casey so much as a D&D player is I know that Casey's not okay with murder. I know that Casey, like as a person, is a very kind and trusting person and is willing to like make new friends and meet people. And she plays Shade perfectly the opposite of who she is as a person. And I obviously with Ari have a lot more difficulty doing that because yeah, Eric's not down with murder, and Eric likes meeting new friends and taking care of the people around him and all that kind of stuff. So Ari has a stronger affinity for middle school age children than Eric does, but other than that, I think we're pretty much on the same wavelength. So,
Hmm.
um, but yes, I think that I would get along well with Ari.
Yeah. Um, Mia, uh, what made you decide to put Shade on your shoulder? I would have assumed she could swim as a fox. It created a nice balance with Pog and Esri each carrying something. Was that part of your thinking or just cute?
Floodwater's poop water, y'all. Like it's not like that's gross to be swimming in as a fox. Like it's gonna get in her mouth and her eyes. Like, ugh. No, I just honestly, like I don't know. It was an impulse thing. It was not a plan at all.
Yeah.
I just once I realized that Shade was in fox form, I was like, well, yeah, it seems like it would be mean to force Shade to swim through floody poop water. So extend my arm and give her a ride. So, and it doesn't
Mhm.
slow when she's in fox form, it doesn't slow Ari down at all to give Shade a ride on his shoulder. So,
True.
yeah.
Again from Savage Artificer, Eric. I love that Ari tries to be more thoughtful of the party's opinions on where to go next, but it seems like he's frustrated by sitting back and not spearheading the direction you all take. He seemed to be more of a leader in the beginning, but now tries to allow the party to make decisions. Is this something Ari is trying to be more mindful of, or is it Eric bleeding through?
It's an Ari driven thing for the most part because, after the going back to the map incident, like the map
Mm-hmm.
job, which I think is probably the biggest turning point of the campaign still to this point in terms of the inter-party dynamics, certainly. Um, like Ari realized that he had to let go of the reins and allow if he continued to try and be concerned about the decisions that Pog, Shade, and Esri were going to make and whether or not they were going to make what was, in his opinion, the right decision, he was literally going to stress himself into an early grave. So he would, you know, try to provide and there's been a bit of an arc because right after that job, Ari completely like didn't even get in the back seat, like laid down in the trunk. Like he was not engaging in the discussions. He was not doing any of
Right.
that. Also because I was playing up this crisis that Ari was going through of, is his mark affecting people
Mm-hmm.
unintentionally? Like is his just sheer force of will enough to activate his mark and cause people to agree with him? So I wanted to play that up of Ari just completely backing away. Now
Yeah.
Ari has started to step back a bit more, or step up a bit more in brainstorming with the party about what should be done next. How should we deal with the situation? And you know, if it's something he really cares about, like a murder, he's fine with being the one being like, no, like not going to do that. But yeah, it's been a bit of an arc, and so I'm interested to see where it continues to go. But yeah.
As am I. Um, Emily asks, where did the choice to make Ari have the constant "I can hear people thinking, but I don't know what they're thinking" come from?
So I wanted to show a marked ramping up of Ari's power via the mark growing into, are we calling it a Khyber mark? Is it still a
I think
Cerberus mark?
Khyber Mark is
Okay.
probably what you would call the highest tier of aberrant.
Yeah. So having the Khyber mark, I wanted there to be an obvious, and obviously there are mechanical things like I got a spell to reflect that power, but I wanted it to be more. But obviously I didn't want to try to have it have a mechanical or even narrative benefit. I wanted it to be not necessarily harmful to Ari, but detrimental. And so, yeah, the ability to just constantly hear the presence of people's thoughts and the emotional resonance of what's going on, but not being able to control it a lot of the time, I think is an interesting way to kind of thread that needle of something that bothers Ari, but isn't going to mechanically have a huge impact. So,
Yeah, and I like it as a decision, and it's there's a little bit of this. It's only really come up once, but there's a little bit of this built into the feat that we
yeah,
created. Um, Basically, as it stands right now, whenever Ari, so part of the lore of an aberrant mark, as the Eberron nerds among you will know, is it's supposed to be at least somewhat detrimental. I haven't leaned as heavily into that as, say, Keith Baker does in the book Son of Khyber, which does just really cool things with aberrant marks. By the way, if you haven't read the Thorn of Brelin trilogy, that one's pretty good. Um, the But when we get to like one that's just like a super powered mark, I really wanted there to be a bit of cost. And so essentially now when Ari casts a spell through his mark, we're rolling a d8, and depending on whether it's odd or even, um, Ari might just psychically lash out at
yeah,
those around him. Because I knew Eric had been kind of playing it with this Jean Grey slightly uncontrolled psychic thing. And so giving that a little bit of mechanical juice, I think, should
yeah,
hopefully give us some cool narrative opportunities, as Ari tries to manage this. Because Ari really hasn't had any opportunity whatsoever to deal with this. It happened today in the
Ari needs a
story
nap
because
so bad. Yeah.
because we didn't take a break between the encounter with Colseer and what we're doing now.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
By the way, that's partly on me. I was trying to communicate that Kiris isn't concerned at all with your like state of energy. Kiris
Yeah.
just tells you what the next thing is. I definitely didn't expect it to be read by the players as we've got to go do this thing now. And it was, and I totally see why it was, but I was not prepared for them to go into a what I built as a pretty challenging set of hazards and encounters entirely without resources. Like the fact
Yeah.
that Esri is, I think, at this point out or has maybe one spell slot, um, and is only a caster.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Is like, if Ari runs out of spell slots, he can still whack things with a sword.
Mm-hmm.
Esri runs out of spell slots, and he's got Shillelagh. And so I am worried
Ari has
as things stand.
0 spell slots, 1 hit die, and 13 hit points currently. So that's where Ari's at in terms of
And that's an
upcoming
episode
episodes.
on. So
Okay, fair enough. Look forward to figuring out how that happened, gang.
yeah, get ready to do some math. Yeah. So, obviously the next episode we've got a combat encounter. And so by the time I'm introducing this encounter, I'm realizing how bad off they are. And I'm just, oh boy, because, you know, very minor spoilers. I didn't intend this encounter that they're about to go into to be the conclusion of a day either. Like, this is just
I thought you were
along
going to
the
say
way.
the conclusion of the campaign.
No, it's like I built this adventure as they start off fresh, and then
Yeah.
encounter one is the environmental hazard of getting there. Maybe they run into, I was depending on their checks, maybe they run into
Yeah,
a
yeah.
problem. There's the lindworm. Encounter two is at the house. Encounter three, depending on rolls. Well, encounter three is very random because the other thing that I didn't expect, that's not a spoiler because it's now we're past the point, absolutely didn't think we were going this way. I built encounters for them taking Jonas to Three Barrel Cove on their own.
Yeah.
And I remembered later, oh, they did say something about going and getting help from the Moon Spears. I totally remember. It's not them. I
Yeah.
just didn't clock that in the moment. And so built. So everything from the moment that they turned back to head up the river inland, that's me making it up as we go. So,
Yeah. Nice.
and playing with and using whatever monster cards I happened to have on my desk to build encounters. So we're very much in improv zone for a few episodes here. So hopefully you'll enjoy that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was our wonderful questions. Thank you all so much
Yes.
for this set of questions. New episodes of Khyber Shards will drop on Mondays. New Khyber Shards answers Fridays. I'm in the wrong order for the outro. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find links to all of our social media and stuff down there below. You can hear more of me and Eric doing nerdy things and playing games over on the Eberron Renewed podcast. And you can see Eric talking about D&D and stuff on the Geek Pantheon YouTube channel. And the Geek Pantheon, which kind of does that and the podcast and other things like that, has a Patreon, which you can find a link to down below, and a Discord, which I think is also linked down below, which is where the people who submit these questions. So if you want to submit questions, come hang out and say hi on our Discord. It's fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a rambling outro. Thanks for rolling with us.